Hey guys, so in this video, we're going to apply something called namespaces to every single one of our classes. So they all have this namespace like this. And what this means is that we will know everywhere what dependencies. We will know that the projectile is dependent on our core, or the weapon doesn't have any dependencies. The enemy health bar depends on the Unity engine, depends on nothing actually of our own code. That the enemy depends on the core and the weapons and so on. And we're just going to show all of the dependencies by using namespaces. It's really going to help us think about the modules and how our game fits together. So I'll see you in there. So a quick aside for you, if you did upgrade to Unity 5.6 and you're getting tons of warnings about the RPG character animation pack, don't worry about it. All this stuff, a lot of it's to do with their scripts. We can remove those scripts, and the rest of it's finicky stuff about the quality of the animations. So we're not worried. They still run and work okay. Right, let's talk about namespacing. So what I want to do is firstly acknowledge how many different scripts we've already written here and talk about why there's going to be a problem if we're not careful. So you've actually already been using namespaces is the first thing to say. It's when you say using at the top of a file. That's when you're dealing with namespaces. It's simply effectively a folder structure for organizing classes. So if you hover over that, then it's using system.collections, which is system, and then it's like a subfolder called collections. And then using Unity Engine is using Unity Engine. Now you don't get everything below. So if you're using Unity Engine, you don't get the stuff in Unity Engine.ai, analytics, etc. All right, you only get access to the classes that are directly namespaced as Unity Engine. And the way that you create the namespaces we'll see in a little bit, but you basically write a little bit of a code around the outside of your classes, and then it means that those classes are only accessible if you've explicitly declared the access to that namespace up the top here by saying using. So the whole point of this is that we understand what is accessible to what. So let's just talk about the kind of modules of our game as a starting point. I'm going to use a new convention with these folders. I'm going to put underscores in front of all the folders that we have created that are about the problem of solving the problem of making a fun RPG effectively. Our software here is all about solving a problem effectively, and the things that we have created are the ones that you see me underlining on the screen right now. Camera UI, characters, environment. You don't have to stick with exactly this folder. In fact, I'd kind of rather you didn't. I'd rather you look behind that and think about what the intention is here. Levels, remember, levels is not just necessarily a collection of scenes. It's the idea that we have different levels of play. You may have more than one scene at a given level. We may change that later. But these folders here are the fundamental structure. Camera UI, characters, core, environment, etc. Editor, below that is a special folder name, which we need to leave as editor. I'll make it lowercase though, I think, so that it doesn't, or at least, not all caps. And I just want our stuff to float to the top. RPG, character, animation, standard assets. Why bother renaming then? Keep it simple. So these folders are the ones we've created. You can actually select multiple folders and say, show me the scripts. And if you do that, then you click here. That's going to show me all the scripts in the folders we've created. So how many have we got? Well, is it going to tell me if I select them all? No, I'm going to have to count them, I think, manually. I can't see it counting it. Oh, yes, I can. At the top right, 14 mono importers. So we've actually written 14 different scripts at the moment. What does that mean from the terms of communication? Let me clear this diagram, this practice diagram. So what it means is that if we've got 14 different scripts, then how many ways are there of these scripts possibly communicating with each other? Well, every script can talk to every other script of it, basically. Or you could draw yourself a grid like this, and you could say, well, here are all the scripts down this side of the grid, all 14. Here are all the 14 scripts along here. Therefore, you've got 14 times 14 possible, times 14 ways of them talking to each other. And then I hear you cry, well, along the diagonal, it's this script talking to itself, so you can discount that. That's true. You've also got, well, depends whether you include two-way communication. Depends whether you consider talking one way different to talking the other. I kind of actually do. So I would say that we've got n squared, which is the number of things in this grid, minus n, which is the number of things along the diagonal, not even over 2. We've got about n squared minus n. Different possible communication lines if you include each different direction as being a different communication line, which means that we've got 14 squared minus 14. We don't really care about the 14, so this is approximately equal to n squared. So we've got about 14 squared. Now, what is that? I can't do that in my head. It's going to be a couple of hundred. Oh, it's pretty close. So 196. At the moment, we've got 196 minus 14, if you really want to be pedantic about it. Then you've got 182 possible communication lines between those scripts. Wow, that's too much, right? That's too much trouble we can get ourselves in. So what do we do? Well, those scripts are already in folders, but there's nothing protecting the code. So we've got some scripts are in a camera UI folder. We've got some scripts in a camera subfolder. We've got some in environment, etc. You get the idea. But there's nothing preventing us from making these cross calls. So the first thing we're going to do, before we talk about any architectural changes and whether we maybe put a core in here and rely on that more heavily to reduce the communication lines, before we do any of that, we're just going to put all our scripts in formal code namespaces so that the compiler will tell us what depends on what, and we can have using statements that say, the camera UI is using the player, or the player is using the environment, or etc. Okay, and then we will eke out these dependencies. So these red things become the namespaces, and they're just going to align with the folders. So let's see that in a little bit more detail. Let's see how we actually implement these namespaces. Then this will all come a little bit more clear. So what we're going to do is we're going to just take a particular folder like camera UI and just go through it. We're just going to pop into the file. Oh, hang on. I'm just going to close things. If you ever lose track of what's what like this, just close your files and reopen. This can happen if you've left Visual Studio open while messing with source control or something like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say namespace RPG, and I'm immediately going to sub-namespace it to rpg.camera UI. In fact, that's the same name as the folder name that this script is in. All right, doesn't have to be. We've just chosen it to be like that just for our own internal consistency. Now, this is the only script where if we put it in a namespace like this, it's not going to make any difference to its behavior. The game will still run. Why is that? Why does putting this in a namespace, making it inaccessible to other places, why does this still run? Have a quick think about that if you're intermediate to advanced. If you're not, don't worry. I don't expect you to know the answer. Well, the reason this doesn't prevent the game from running at this stage is, and we're not getting any warnings, that's why I pop back to Unity, we're not getting any, we're getting warnings, but we're not getting any errors that actually prevent running of the game. The reason for that is that none of our code actually tries to call camera follow or use anything of type camera follow. So what's happening is it's still a mono behavior, so Unity is reaching in here and then calling into these callbacks, start and late update. So let's move on from camera follow, because doing it to camera follow, namespacing camera follow has no impact. Let's namespace the camera raycaster. Now, of course, you can collapse down the class if you want, and we can say namespace rpg.camera UI. Now, it'd be prudent to copy this, wouldn't it, right now? Copy at least this part of it, like so. And then you can come in and just paste a final bracket on and open the class back up. So we have now namespaced both camera follow and camera raycaster. Because we've namespaced camera raycaster, look, this is telling us immediately, you have other things that are dependent on the camera raycaster. Well, one of them, let's go and solve them. One of them is the cursor affordance, and that is in the camera UI folder in the camera UI namespace. So I'm not worried. We just paste that in, come along the bottom, pop in another bracket, and say, well, the way that we're going to give cursor affordance access to the camera raycaster is simply to put it in the same namespace. Things in the same namespace have access to each other. So far, every script we've written has access to every other script. That's the problem. We're trying to reduce the communication lines. So that one has been solved by putting it in the same namespace. Now let's move down. Here, both player and player movement is the first time where this namespacing has shown us a dependency that we previously didn't explicitly know about. The player and the player.cs and the player movement.cs, or more abstractly, the characters, are dependent upon the camera UI class, or namespace, should I say. That it may or may not be a problem. I don't like it, but right now we're not solving it. We're just dealing with it. So I'm going to go fix that. I'm going to go to the player. I'm going to say using here, and then it's rpg dot. Now, it won't autocomplete yet because our scripts haven't compiled since we started using the new namespace. So rpg.camera UI, and I'm going to put a to-do in, and I'm going to say to-do, consider rewiring. Okay, I'm not going to do it right now because I'm trying to teach you namespaces. So we may not want the player to be dependent upon the camera UI. We may not want a change in the camera UI code to be able to break the way the player works. That's why I'm saying consider rewiring. Okay, save your script. If it's saved, you come back in here, and you've got the same issue in the player movement. So I might as well use the same code. I also may want to consider rewiring it. By rewiring, let me just show you what I mean. Let me pop into a sketch, clear the sketch off for you, and just say this. So we have characters, and we have camera UI, and what we're saying at the moment is that we have a dependency like this. Camera UI is being injected into the characters. What we might want to do to rewire in the future is to route via maybe a core or a game manager or something like that. But we're not doing that now. We're not re-architecting. We're just exposing dependencies. I keep repeating that. All right, now let's go back. Now, what's this one? This is saying that the camera raycaster editor, that's the only slight curveball to this folder structure. So you have the special editor folder for editor scripts. Well, we're going to have to deal with those separately. Luckily, we only have one, which is the camera raycaster, and it's perfectly reasonable for the camera raycaster editor script to also be in the namespace rpg.camera UI, because it is a complete companion script to the camera raycaster. It just determines how it works in the editor. So once we've done that and namespaced all of those scripts, I think that the red errors will go away. They do. And that if we were to go to one of our levels, like, say, the showcase scene, that it will run. And if it does, we are on our way. All right, so that's good. Now, I'm going to challenge you in a second to go ahead and namespace everything. There is an inconsistency we're going to need to deal with. Look, before we do that, the player health bar is in camera UI, yet the enemy health bar is with the enemy. So I'm actually going to move the player health bar next to the player now. And we're not going to namespace the player health bar as a camera UI namespace. But what we're going to do is we're going to namespace it as a character. So namespace rpg.character, because it's now inside the player, which is a character namespace, because that's how we've laid out our folders. All right, so having done that, let me just solve those errors so that we get rid of this inconsistency. Has that eked out any dependencies that we... No, it hasn't. That's good. So that suggests that was a good move. We moved the player in there and the player health bar in next to the player, and it all sits together nicely. Cool. So what I want you to do then is to go ahead and namespace everything yourself. So I'm going to get you onto the challenge slide, which is here. Namespace your classes. Ensure all your scripts are namespaced. Check you can still run the game, and share any architectural questions or insights you have after having done this process. So go ahead, pause the video, spend a little time using those namespaces. Don't change any architecture right now, and I'll see you in a moment. Okay, welcome back. So I'm going to whip through this relatively quickly because I want to get it done, and it's nothing too clever going on. So what I'm doing here is looking in the camera UI folder. I'm looking at the preview over on the inspector and making sure that I see namespace at the top of all the three scripts, and I do. Good. Let's move on. Characters. We have dominant hand. Well, dominant hand, again, is a namespace rpg.now character, like that. Now, character, let's be a little bit formal here. We have character and characters. So which one are we going to call it? I think I'm going to call it characters. I think that the refactor tool will let me deal with that. Let's try. Let's see if that will work. So if we go to here and we try Control R, and I put an S on the end, it should change that in all the necessary files. We'll see in a minute when we get to the next file. Let's just iterate through. Enemies, enemy. Well, enemy hasn't been namespaced yet, so let's go ahead and do that. Namespace rpg.characters, and now it is actually helping us with the autocomplete because all of the scripts that contain it contain the definition of rpg.characters have all compiled at least once, so therefore it's got a complete set of scripts using that, and then it shows up. Let's go enemy health bar. Before we worry about these errors, let's just namespace everything, because a bunch of these will be internal errors that are just saying, well, you know, the health bar can't access whatever. Well, let's put them all in the right namespace, and then we'll work out what dependencies we have between namespaces. So that's that one, and it's really simple work, this enemy UI. It's one of those things that once you realize it's going to add value to your project, then you just get on with it. Namespace RPG. Ooh, if I could type straight, rpg.characters. And why aren't I cutting and pasting more? Well, I do sometimes, but it can be harder for you to follow if I cut and paste too much. So enemies is done. That's all the scripts in enemies. NPCs, there's nothing. Player, we've already namespaced, have we? No, we haven't, actually. So we need to do that. Namespace rpg.characters. And down to the bottom of the file and close the bracket. Okay, that's that one done. Player health, that's already in the characters namespace, and the character was renamed to characters. And player movement, that one, what did we do? We didn't put a namespace around that, and we should do. So namespace rpg.characters, open it up, and that's fine. Now we still need this using camera UI, because if we got rid of using camera UI and saved, what it'll do is we'll get a warning down here that it doesn't know what a camera raycaster is. So we still need that dependency. That is a dependency between different namespaces, okay, which we are going to have some of. There's no point in having these different modules if they can't talk to each other. The whole purpose of this is to really work out how we want them to talk to each other. So as a final check at the characters level, I'm going to say, show me the scripts at characters level. I'm just going to flick through them, namespaced, namespaced. I'm looking over here on the right in the inspector, namespaced, 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 and namespaced, and namespaced. Woohoo! This is so much fun. Okay, the core now. I think that it makes sense to just completely follow the same convention. So we're going to say namespace RPG, rpg.core, and it doesn't come up with autocomplete because we do not have a script that has that compiling in it yet. All right, now let's go for spin me as well before we do anything else. rpg.core. Now, spin me is one we may take out of the core and say that actually that goes alongside the assets in the asset pack, perhaps, but let's not change anything right now. That's cool. Environment has no scripts. Level has no scripts. Weapon has 2. Let's just get on with that as well. Let's do the whole lot and then sort it out. rpg.weapon or weapons. Weapons, okay. Let's just be consistent. Nothing's keeping us honest there, unfortunately, in terms of what we name the namespace versus the folders. So we're going to just need to be a little bit disciplined and careful with that. Namespace rpg.weapons, and finally this one, namespace rpg.weapons. Open it up now. In a moment, we get to look at all our dependencies, our horrible dependencies that we have between things. Is that it? Well, that is it. And again, how do you check? You select all the folders, go to script, make sure you're selected here on the search for all these things, and we can just whip through them. You can keep an eye down the bottom here for which folder we're in, camera UI, and up here at the namespace on the right-hand side in the inspector, and just make sure they're consistent. So camera, camera, namespace, namespaced, characters, characters, characters. Yeah, it's all looking good up to this point. Core, characters again, characters again, characters, weapons, core, weapons. Okay, awesome. Now, that's all done. What I'm actually going to do is in my version control system, so I don't have to do this again, I'm going to stage these changes just in case I fluff up the next part of the video. And then at least I can come back to this bit. And then I'm going to go through and solve these compilation errors with you. So here are the errors. Let's just quickly chomp into them. So this is saying that the enemy doesn't have the namespace idamageable. So, all right, we're just at the moment going to fix it using rpg.core, which is where the idamageable was defined. To do, consider rewire, and that's it. Let's move on to the next one. Just fix them. The player also needs the core. Okay, well, maybe this is the hub and spoke model we go for, but we're not worried about it at the moment. We're just eking them out. Okay, and consider rewire. Now, if I was doing this, not as in a teaching capacity, I would actually just deal with these architectural issues potentially right now, but I want to get you the namespacing down before this video gets too long. So this one here, the problem is it doesn't understand weapons, so this tells us now that our player is dependent on the weapons. Now, what I will do is where we have multiple rewire to-dos, I'm just going to do a block like that just so that we don't repeat ourselves. Okay, DRY is the acronym you want to remember in programming. DRY equals don't repeat yourself. Okay, and try and spell things correctly. All right, wicked. So now we know what's dependent on what. We know that the player is dependent on the camera and the core and the weapons, and maybe we don't want all these dependencies, but that's not the subject of this video. The purpose was to get everything running again. Now, what's happened? I've saved. We've fixed those issues. That's uncovered a whole bunch of other issues. So we go to the first error. And we say, okay, the enemy is dependent on the projectile. Where's projectile coming from? Presumably weapons. So again, I'm going to have this consider rewire block. And then I'm just going to quickly come in here and just say using rpg.weapons. And that will solve that issue. And then back to Unity, watch the issue disappear. Getting very close. Now, what's the problem here? This is that the projectile doesn't understand the idamageable interface. Again, I'll come in and say to do, consider rewire. And then I'm just going to say using rpg.core, which is where the idamageable interface is. And that solves that, suggesting to me the damageable interface probably wants to be in weapons, but then the player uses it as well. So probably doesn't. He probably is core, and that's probably okay. But not what we're solving here. Okay, cool. Let's see. Yep, that's good. We've got only a few warnings. So let's just try playing. Make sure things move around. It does. Oh, wow. Draw breath for a second. Good job. We have achieved namespace separation of all of our own code. And in future, thou shalt, every time you create a new C# script, thou shalt give it a namespace immediately, won't you? And we won't ever have to do that type of thing again. Yes, it's fundamentally possible, by the way, to have that done automatically. What you need to do, if you're interested, is basically Google it. But you can go and find your Unity program folder. I'll show you really very quickly. And you can just tune out in this video, by the way, now, if you don't care about how to make Unity automatically add a namespace at the top of a file. Most of you don't need to care, so just move on to the next video. Honestly, it's boring and it's not necessary, and you'll learn better if you don't. But if you're already bored of the idea of namespacing videos, you go into Unity, Program Files, Unity Editor, Data or somewhere like this, and Resources, I think, and then Script Templates, there it is. And then this guy here is your C# script template, and if you look at that, you'll be very familiar with this because it says, this is what I type whenever you make a new C# script. Here's some variables. I pop in the script name, which is basically the same as the file name, and that's it, okay? So, but you're going to have a bit of trouble modifying that file. It has weird permissions on it, and I probably wouldn't bother right now. But just in case you care, that's a bit of bonus content for you, and I'm going to stop talking.